Thank you, everybody, and thank you to the person who pointed out that I couldn't be giving my talk from sitting there to make me realise that this is the slot I'm speaking in. So I put this talk together today assuming that some people might not know what the Internet of Things are and that other people would know an awful lot about it. So it's going to be a mix of the two of those things. But just as a quick, how many people here have heard the phrase Internet of Things other than Dervla? So there's quite a good few of people. And one of the things you'll find is that practically everyone is using the phrase Internet of Things at the moment. So I'm hoping I can shed some light on it. And some ways that I think the Internet of Things can be such a creative kind of tool for us to think differently. So I suppose the first thing to say when you're talking about things really mean things. It means absolutely everything in the world. And I just put some icons down here. So you're talking about people, plants, chairs, podiums, meters, everything in the world. And essentially, the Internet of Things world is about absolutely instrumenting everything we can think of in the world and connecting it to the Internet. And there's kind of no bounds to the limits we can take it to, because as we all know, the world is full of things, and my own house is full of far too many things. So maybe it'll be a way to get rid of things. But in any case, you need to think just really, really broadly. It's about instrumenting everything that we can possibly instrument. So I suppose the question that people ask, first of all, is how do you get the internet into things? And I think it's good to just kind of stand back and think what's involved in that. Is everyone okay with where I'm standing here? There's not an enormous amount of information on the slides anyway, so you can see okay. So the way I think about it is really what you need. You need to give the thing a name so that it's identifiable. You need to give the thing some kind of job to do. And you need to give the thing a voice. And that really is essentially how you put the thing on the internet. So what I've done here is I've taken a very simple example, and I'm just going to go through that example and why you might want to do that, and then go on to kind of more sophisticated examples after that. So this is a chair, and I know if everyone goes to IKEA, chairs in IKEA have names. So if you want to put it on the internet, it's going to have some kind of unique name. This job that the chair has been given is a really simple job. It's a job there's a pressure sensor built into it, and it can just tell you whether somebody's sitting in it or not. And the voice, and that's the world I come from, is the radio that you put in to allow it to speak to the internet. And that's really the simple way to think of everything. You're instrumenting the built environment, people, animals, everything around you, with a name, a job, and a voice in the world around you. So I suppose the really, really obvious question that you ask next is why the hell would we bother wanting to do that, and what's the purpose of that? And this, I think, is where the Internet of Things really begins to kind of come alight. So just supposing we have a whole load of chairs, and we've instrumented all of those chairs, you could ask yourself, okay, what could I do with that? And what could I do with the fact that those chairs are now not dumb chairs anymore, but they're somehow smart, and they're able to communicate with the internet? And the reality is that there are very, very many things that you can do with that. And really, it's up to you to decide how you're going to do. So a few simple things. I could use it to determine which seats are free. So I could use it as an admission system. I could say, okay, there's seats there, and they're free, and anyone coming in would know immediately where to go. From a student point of view, I could use it as a roll call. So I could associate people with seats, and I could decide I want to figure out who's there and who's not there, who missed their lecture, who didn't. Don't have to automatically do a roll call or anything like that. That's another thing you could do. The other thing you could do, you could be way more sophisticated. You could say, okay, I want to understand the pattern that people begin to sit down in. So I'm actually going to orientate my room according to that pattern. So you could have a smart room, you could have speakers, lighting, or whatever that directs itself to where people are sitting. Or you could, for example, the way I feel about it when I lecture, everyone always wants to sit in the back. You can make it really uncomfortable for them to sit in the back to force them up to the front. But whatever you want to do, you can make the room react to what's happening. You could also do, from a marketing perspective, understand which seats are the favorite seats. Or you could take it even further and you could kind of link it to a service. You could say, okay, someone has sat in that seat more than any other seat, and this is a public seat and I need to be really, really careful, so I should replace that seat and make sure it's okay. And obviously, I just gave one simple example of where you put a pressure sensor in it, but you could imagine you could add other sensors. You could add accelerometers or gyrometers or other things that tell you somebody's always leaning backwards on the seat and they shouldn't be, that seat is about to break, whatever the thing happens to be. So the point here is not to persuade you that you all need smart seats or that all seats need to be instrumented. The point is that when you start to make an object smart, and when you begin to collect data from that object, and when you begin to understand the context of what you're doing, That's what you talk about when you talk about the Internet of Things. So it's the instrumentation of the objects, the collection of data from the objects, and the processing of that data to make meaning. So most people who are here will probably have heard everyone talk about the cloud and cloudification. And essentially, this is where all these different things come together, where you take the individual bits of data, it goes over the internet. So a lot of the time it's stored in the cloud. It's processed, and people probably have heard the phrase big data or data analytics, and that's used to make meaning. And essentially, we can make as much meaning as we're clever to make. So the great thing about kind of data analytics, it allows us to process huge volumes of data and to do that really, really quickly. But what it's really, really saying is that if I make objects smart, and if I make the world smart around me, kind of the world is my oyster, how I decide to use that, and how I decide to use it for my own information, or how I decided to use in other services. So that's roughly really what the Internet of Things is. So when you look to the future and people say, okay, what's going to happen with the Internet of Things? A lot of companies are kind of making predictions about the number of items that will be on. And you see these numbers, that there will be 50 billion things connected to the Internet by 2020. And in fact, actually, that's a very, very small number when you think of it. So that's about 7 things per people in the world. And when you think of the number of devices we increasingly have, and when you think of actually the world that we live in, and when you think of actually the number of things in our life, you can really see these numbers kind of rising. And you can really see how the world can be instrumented. And there's a whole load of areas already where it is highly instrumented, like in industry and things like that. So the next slide is a very, very busy slide. It's from a company called Libellium. I'm in no way promoting that company whatsoever. It just was a slide that I thought was useful. So Libellium makes sensors. And what this slide does, it tries to say, okay, look, there is just a huge range of areas in which the Internet of Things can play a role. And just to point at a few of them, people here might be familiar with the term smart cities. So you have things like smart parking, where you can automatically determine whether a parking spot is empty or not. And all of these things, they might, on the face of it, sound like a very simple thing. But for example, smart parking has huge impacts on congestion in cities. It really affects whether cars are backed up. It really affects how smoothly the traffic flows around. So you can think about the thing in and of itself, but most importantly, you think how that affects the environment around it. So in this slide here, they're talking about smart cities, they're talking about connected health, they're talking about hazardous spaces, they're talking about air pollution in the environment. And I suppose the main message from this is that there's kind of no bounds to the things that you can make smart. And it does all go back to this whole idea. You instrument the thing, you collect data from it, you process that data, make meaning from that, and you react to that. So there's 2 ways in which you can react to it. You can react by, just making a decision, I'm going to buy more of a certain kind of chair. But you can also put actuators, things that are able to take action themselves in the objects. So for example, if it's something to do with energy, like the ESB are interested in, you can actually have actuators that change temperatures, control how much energy you're using, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really, really about a smart world and making everything smart in it. So that's just kind of, I suppose, kind of an overview of what this stuff means. So what I just want to do now is I just want to go through a number of different ways that I think the Internet of Things can make you think differently and kind of maybe question the world around you and look at things in a different way. So the first way is I think that the Internet of Things can kind of turn things upside down. And what I mean by that is, if I asked you to find something in this room, so this is not a picture of my bedroom, but my bedroom currently actually doesn't look too much unlike this. But essentially, your natural instinct would be that it is difficult to find things in this mess, and I would take ages to find things in this mess. And this sounds like a silly statement to make, but the Internet of Things allows you to live with this kind of a mess. And in fact, if you look at things like smart warehousing, this is what I have a picture of here, which Amazon use, they no longer need to sort things according to the way we used to sort things. So you can imagine if you had a shop, you might put all the shoes together, you might put all the books together, you might put all the tables together. That doesn't matter anymore. Once you make things smart, they can be anywhere. So in this warehouse, all the objects are tagged, they're all smart, the location of them is known, robots can go and fetch them. And what they also do, which I think is really interesting, so the whole warehouse rearranges itself for particular events. So if it knows that Christmas is coming, or Valentine's Day is coming, or Mother's Day is coming, the actual goods that are relevant to those kind of events move nearer to where they need to be accessed, and the goods that are less relevant move further away. So you're actually thinking completely differently. You're saying, okay, my understanding of organization and storing and accessing is totally different. I can make it much more dynamic. I don't need to think the way I thought before. And I can re-envisage things. And that's where you see, you look at people and think, oh, they're really smart. They thought about that. They thought, okay, I don't need to do things like I've done it before. And I think that's where technology is really interesting. A lot of the times you find in the digital world, we try to recreate the analog world that we're used to, but I think the greatest advances are when we say, okay, I don't need to do it like that anymore, I can do it a different way. And I think the Internet of Things is very powerful in that kind of turning things upside down way. I think the second thing that's really, really interesting is that the Internet of Things can change behaviors. There's huge numbers of examples that I can give in terms of changing behaviors. So obviously in the energy world, you can imagine that, if you fine-tune your house to your needs, if you decide you only want to heat one room rather than the whole house, if you have a very smart home, you can kind of change your behavior, change the behavior of the house. And the particular example I picked here is an example to do with smart agriculture. So Ireland is very, very interested in the smart agricultural field. I suppose to a certain extent we pride ourselves in being good at food and food production, and I think the next step in that is kind of smart agriculture and where that will fit in. So I came across this project that a group of people in Waterford Institute of Technology were doing with changing the behaviour of cows. So in this particular case, the cows were all tagged. So the grass was all tagged and the environment that they were in as well. And they had a deep understanding of the genetic makeup of the different cows and which cows produce good milk. And they were able to direct the cows with invisible fences to the area of grass they wanted them to eat. And so I was going through this with somebody one day, and there's two ways of explaining this. They either directed the good cows to the good grass, or they directed the good cows to the bad grass. It's up to you what you want. But essentially, it's where you start to think of the whole picture. So you better understand the biology of the cow. You better understand the growth of your grass because your environment is instrumented. You better understand that everything is happening, and you use the technology to understand in the first place and affect change in the second place, kind of redirecting the behaviours of that. So there's millions of examples of where behavioural change can be affected. And this is both good and bad. I think it's something we hugely need to be aware of, because this is what will be being done to us. Think of us as the cows or whatever, and as the world is increasingly instrumented, and as a lot of decisions are being taken through technology and through processing of big data in the cloud, we need to be aware of kind of what's happening around us. The other thing I think that's really, really creative about it is it lets you see patterns you can't normally see. And I think that's increasingly the case in the world we live in. So as we instrument the world around us, or as we increasingly leave traces of ourselves in the digital world, greater analysis can be done in doing that. So the particular example I've picked here is one from sport. So this is a nice sweaty scrum. And essentially, the way things are today, and it's really, really fascinating, the level of instrumentation that's already happening on the sports field. So all of these players are instrumented themselves. They have accelerometers, gyrometers, location pieces. So you might notice sometimes rugby players have kind of something stuck back there now in their kit. And this is analysed in the extreme. So there's an example here, again, I just found this online, of a product. There's biometric compression, GPS tracking. There's a mouthguard sensor. I was just wondering what the hell are they doing with that. A muscle activity sensor. And all of this information is analysed both live during matches, where people can make substitutions far more effectively. They can say, okay, that person's likely to get injured. We need to keep them for the next match. Or that person is flagging in energy, and I think we need to swap somebody in. And it is utterly fascinating, the amount of instrumentation, the amount of IoT applications, the amount of data analytics, the amount of real-time reaction, and then the amount of long-term planning that happens when they look at this in the aggregate and think about their players or whether they want them or not. That's happening now. So sports is not what we used to be in that sense. And in fact, actually, what you'll find a lot of the time in these areas, at areas where there's big money at stake, is a lot of the areas where these new ideas are being tried out. And in fact, I know that DCU in Dublin, they're involved in making Croke Park a smart stadium. So a lot of these kind of technologies are not alone being put in the players, but increasingly be put in the stadia around that. So it's really, really important, I think, that you can actually, as I said, really understand behaviors in a way you didn't before through this instrumentation. The thing for me that I find really interesting is I think you can use the Internet of Things, I think, in many ways. I mean, obviously, I think a lot of people are kind of afraid a little bit of the Big Brother society, but I also think we can use the Internet of Things to challenge authority. And the example I have here is Irish water. So I know this is a bit of a, I suppose, a controversial example, but as you know, there's meters all over Ireland. So the way the meters are currently being read, so they all have little radios in them, and the way they're read is that you can drive by and collect the readings from the meters, and Irish Water can determine how much water was used in each house. So they're able to collect thousands and thousands in any one day because you don't have to be right next to the meter, and this is a fantastic thing about things being instrumented. However, the question I ask is this Internet of Things flows this direction, whereas if we had a proper Internet of Things, it would be flowing back into our own houses, where we could automatically read our own meters, automatically understand our behavior on the spot, know how much, like, I want to be able to take a shower and know instantly how much that water used. I'd like to be able to collectively know among my community, what's my community, what are we using collectively, and make decisions about that, make informed decisions about it. So they can be very powerful instruments if you can instrument the world around you for collecting information. But it's really important who has that information and where that information flows and who's in charge of that information and what decisions get to be made about that information. And that's why I put this example in. And I suppose the final thing that I want to talk about is that the Internet of Things can create new currencies. And on the face of it, this might seem like a strange thing to say, but it's really, really important to realize today the currencies we use. So most people here probably use Google and the Google search engine. And on one level, it's a free search engine. But in another way, it isn't, because you're paying with currency. And the currency you're paying with is, we call it cognitive IP or privacy. So you're saying, I like this, I don't like that. Or you're revealing things about yourself. And that's a payment mechanism, really. And essentially, we're moving away from a world where currency is just money into a world where data is golden. And all of the data that will be collected from this instrumented world, right from the edge when it's kind of raw data, and then it's processed as it goes along the way, and then it's passed into the cloud and processed further, all has a value. And I think the really important thing in the world we live in today is we have to ask ourselves, what's that value and who's monetizing that value? So for example, I often quote, I use a website called DataCoo. Has anyone heard of it here? So it's you can sell your Twitter feed, or you can sell your credit card feed. So my Twitter feed is worth about 35 cents a month, so that's how useless my Twitter feed is. But nonetheless, it's an indication of monetization of the data. And as we go towards this highly instrumented world, we're going to have to ask ourselves, and we haven't the answer to this, is what is the data equation? So are 3 pieces of information about the weather worth something about my personal health and something that's instrumented on me equal to 2 pieces of information about a cow? And this might seem like a ridiculous equation to stick up there and say, what the hell does that mean? But that is the world that we're going into, where data is money, it has a value, and that really we will be exchanging that as much for anything else. And the Internet of Things, I think, is just absolutely at the kind of epicenter of this kind of world. So I just draw this to a close by saying I come from a centre called Connect, and Connect, as Dervla mentioned, is a centre that looks at networks and communications. And we are very much interested in the Internet of Things from a wide range, and this is my very last slide. So the Internet of Things is kind of a strange world. There is a ton of examples out there already. So I gave you the examples of sports. The ESB has a lot of really good instrumented stuff. I gave you the examples of smart agriculture. There's huge numbers of industries around the world, and you'll hear the phrase Industry 4.0. That's when people talk about the Internet of Things and its use in automation in industry. But it's still a world that's very siloed, that's very bitty, that's still waiting to take off. People haven't figured out all the business models. They're not quite sure how they're going to make money or how things are going to work. It's very challenging for companies because they have to work across different areas now. So companies that you might have been in competition with, you have to work together. So there's lots of questions. And then there's huge questions about the devices and the networks in which they go in. So we work on designing sensors for Internet of Things. How do you design sensors that are really low powered that you can deploy and forget? How do you do energy harvesting to power them in the most efficient way? You know, what kind of circuits that can be small or efficient, or how do they connect to the internet? What frequencies? What should that network look like? How do you abstract the internet, what we call the programmable, malleable surface that the world is, and allow it to be really easy for third parties to create new services for that. So it's a really exciting world. There's lots of examples there that are in existence already, and there's lots of research and work to be done. I'd end by saying, you know, it's an amazing space for kind of niche ideas and new markets to emerge. And that's why I talk about the creative world of IoT. I think it's only your imagination that will limit the kind of things that you can do with it, especially as all sorts of new technologies are emerging. So I'm sure everyone here could have great ideas to go home and create an Internet of Things company. So thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.